Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 56 of the CornerBlue podcast. Here we are again. Today, we're going to be talking about the game that just took place between the United States national team and El Salvador national team. And we're also going to talk maybe about the game against Honduras. How are you doing, Andres? It's nice to connect again after one of those very exciting games against one of the top teams in CONCACAF.
Yeah, no, good to see you, Uwo. Good to link up, get another episode done. And yeah, still coming off the game. Obviously, result that I think was kind of in the books, considering our head-to-head record against them, but nonetheless a great new chapter to what's been the head-to-head the last few, I'd say 4 games now under Hugo Perez. So, going into a match like this, the results have been close: 1-0, 1-1, 0-0. Good results at home, loss away. So, I think it was, you could only expect a close result like this. Unfortunately, it didn't go El Salvador's way. It would have been historic to get a win in the US. But there's a lot to kind of dissect, and that's what we're going to do on today's episode.
First of all, shout out to all the fans of the podcast. I was sharing with Andres that it's very nice to be at a stadium like last week when I was at the BMO Stadium, LAFC's stadium, to watch the game against Honduras. And I definitely had at least 3 people reach out and say, hey, a good podcast. I listened to the podcast. So
That's dope.
that was very nice
Nice.
to hear. It keeps us motivated, and we know that there's at least a few people out there listening to us. So that's good to know. In terms of the positives from this game, I think there's always positives that we can take, right? And I think that because under Hugo Perez, we've been getting what I consider good results against the United States. I think that it's kind of easy to forget that we used to get scored on 6-0, 5-2, 5-1, 3-0. We forget that the United States with a B squad will beat us, really badly. And because now it's kind of becoming a pretty normal thing that we actually play very smart games against the United States. I think they know us really well, and we know them really well. And it's no coincidence that the games are ending, 1-0, late minute goal and things like that. I think that says a lot about the work that the coaching staff is doing. And I want to start with that because I think it's easy to forget where we're coming from. And some people may say, conformistas, con eso se conforman. I'm not
Con
celebrating.
experiencia.
Ajá, ajá. Lo mismo de siempre, jugamos como nunca y perdemos como siempre. No, that's not what I'm saying. It's the reality. And if we want our national team to change, we have to start thinking differently. We have to start approaching things differently. We can't, fall into the same story where we hear somebody say that and we keep repeating it, or we want the coach to be fired, and we see it in the league every torneo. We see a coach getting fired after losing 2 games or 3 games. So I just want to start with that. The top note, impossible to ignore. I think that what I saw in Brian Hill, it's very promising.
Yeah, I think that's a main asterisk or main point to this match. Like, the result is effervescent. The tournament, it's something that, did we truly aspire to be in the Final Four of the Nations League? Like, I'm sorry, it's a recent tournament. No one even knew what we were playing for, or hardly anyone really had a grasp of what this match was, was in play in this match until recently, myself included, considering that CONCACAF just announced the format changes to qualifiers and Gold Cup and Copa America and all this. So this match, I think, in a sense, was kind of an afterthought to everybody except for the players, the coaching staff. But I think more than anything, we're getting close to making a statement. I shout out again to our listeners, especially on Twitter. I mentioned earlier that we were going to record tonight, and so I asked for people's thoughts. And definitely the one word that was repeated multiple times was competency. And I agree with that concept that El Salvador in the first half, for the most part, looked competent. That, tactically they were sound. The transitions were finally looking like those dynamic transitions that we saw in the Gold Cup with Hugo Perez, that we only saw little chispazos of throughout the octagonal, but they looked organized. They looked like they knew what they were doing, and there wasn't that feeling of desperation or improvisation in the first half. So I think, with that said, there were some changes that were forced, like Roldan going out because of injury, the midfield kind of getting lost in the second half. But I'd say if we could focus more on the fact that this was Brian Hill's first, his debut, his first cap, and it made a big difference. So I don't know if you want to go into kind of what that looked like or what that difference entailed.
Well, you touched on many points. First of all, just going back a little bit, you mentioned
It's
that
all good.
it seems like we're getting close to making a statement. And I think what you said, it's important to highlight, because if you want to make a statement, it's not going to happen from night and day. It's not when you're not going to make a statement going from losing 6-0 to suddenly you win. That's not going to happen. That's not the way things work. But am I seeing the national team closer to making a statement against a big team like USA or Mexico? Yes, definitely. Because do I feel nervous before I watch El Salvador play USA? Not really. Not the way I used to feel 4 years ago, 3 years ago, where it was like, gosh, I hope we don't get destroyed. Let's just hope for the best. And now it's more like there's a trust for the team. There's a trust that the team, like you said, we're beginning to play with an identity. It's like we know what the team is going to do or try to do. We know that if the team has the ball in the back line, we know that they're going to pass it around until they find open spaces. We know that there's going to be a whole bunch of passes in the back, and that's what we've been doing. And we're seeing less and less mistakes in the back line. I don't know if you remember, just a year ago, we were making really terrible mistakes in the back, attempting to play the style that Hugo Perez wanted our team to play. And he even said it, we at some point, we're going to stop making those mistakes. And what is the biggest highlight of this game? The back line. That's the reality. So I just wanted to mention that we are getting closer. We're not getting killed. We're actually competing head to head against one of the top two teams in CONCACAF. And that's something that to highlight. And then going back to Brian Hill, similar, you're playing against one of the top two teams in CONCACAF. I mean, it would have been great if the guy had scored, but we started seeing some of those things that we haven't had for a while, which is a number 9 who can hold the ball. And he did it a couple times.
And break through lines, not just receive with the back to goal and wait for teammates to accompany him. No, he wasn't waiting. He was, taking on the defender and then opening wide or pushing towards goal, which is something that we haven't seen in a while.
He has everything it takes to be in that position. We saw a glimpse of it against a top team. Now, what would happen against a rival that is closer to us in level? I think he's going to start scoring some goals. And eventually, once our midfielders learn his style of play and feed him more balls, I think that we're gonna have a very good center forward for a while. So that was definitely a highlight. Zabaleta was a big highlight, I think. Um, Dominguez was as well. Unfortunately, he was scored on, and we've seen a couple times where he's put into those situations, or he puts himself into those situations. We saw it against Jamaica, where they kind of just push him a little bit, and he loses balance and speed. He can't catch up. We don't
Yeah,
have the same athleticism as some of the other teams. But nevertheless, he had done a very good job. So it can't really complain about the back line. Even Tamacas, who was playing in a position that he doesn't normally play, I think he did much better than what he did against Honduras in that same
definite
position.
improvement.
The back line did what the back line had to do. We didn't create enough in midfield. I think the midfield was sacrificed a lot because they had to do a lot of defensive work. And we defend in blocks. I mean, we start defending, the forward, um, Brian, then Enrico. They're like the first line of defense, and they
Yeah,
they defend a lot and they run a lot. Um, it was definitely a game where we didn't have much of the ball. So
it was 42 percent to 58.
yeah,
But second half, it definitely felt like that's when the US, you know, used their athleticism and Salvador looked worn out. And with the subs, it just the midfield was lost. I wanted to piggyback on a couple things, like with the back line, considering that there was a certain level of improvisation in terms of, you know, the left wing spot, the left back spot is still up for grabs in the sense that the gap that Larin leaves there is still pretty significant. Like you said, Tamacas improved from his game from Honduras, where he looked lost. But you could tell that he put some work in. Then he had to make this. Hugo Perez had to make the switch with Roldan going out due to injury. And then Nelson, it's Flores, right? Nelson Flores
Flores Blanco.
going in on left back. In this game, he didn't seem as comfortable as other ones that he's been in. There was no attack on the left side, in part due to Heido absorbing 2-3 marks at the same time and not being able to release it, tired legs. But I think one thing that's concerning to me is, that left back position has to be filled, and that's where, considering that this back line didn't have its natural left back, Roldan had to leave. A 1-0 is a pretty good result. The pairing of Dominguez and Zabaleta, we know where they're lacking, and where they make up for it. Zabaleta obviously is not as fast, but his positioning and his reading of the plays are key. Dominguez, at times, I felt was out of position or not marking as compact or clean as he could, and got caught sliding too many times. And that's something that is very traditional with the Salvadoran defense, is compensating poor marking by sliding. and but through all that, I think the one goal, I felt like Flores was caught out of position where they were able to make that through ball, and he was nowhere near it on the left flank. And then Dominguez kind of got caught flat-footed, but also, it was, his speed was exposed, going up against Pepe that had just checked into the game. So I feel like, that's the main significant mistake. Midfield, I really liked Enrico's defensive awareness, you can see that that's improved significantly. Where, he was actually going in for tackles that could have ended up in fouls, yellow cards, but he was making his presence felt, which I appreciated. Um, Landa Verde looked lost because, like you said, they had to play more defensively. So he's not your typical box to box modern midfielder. He's more of the Salvadoran league midfielder that has more freedom to roam and then can catch back or check back in when needed. But in this sense, you need to be tactically sound and you can't give up those gaps. And since he had to cover that ground in the defensive mid in accompanying Narciso, we didn't see too much of him on the offensive end. Um, I feel like that's one of the pieces missing for another piece that's missing for Hugo Perez system to work better is having that modern box to box defensive midfielder that can turn into, a semblance of a playmaker going forward. And that's something that I still feel we're lacking. But overall, the first 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes, I said, well, would play with this confidence, compact, making touches, playing on the US's defensive end and not letting the ball pass the midfield consistently. And it was one of those moments that it, like I mentioned earlier, if the team had that energy that it had or looked fine-tuned like it did in the Gold Cup, what was it already 2 years ago?
Mhm.
And once the injuries came, not only to Gil but to Roldan, some of the changes made in the mid, that's when things kind of seemed to fall apart. Gavin Reyes did not have his best game. I feel like he one play that stands out was when he was with his back to goal on the Salvadoran defensive and on the right wing and made this random pass to nobody. And a US player got in and almost turned into a chance, and they had to foul outside the box. Like, that's the type of stuff that we need to clean up. But anything else you want to mention, Uwe?
Yeah, I mean, I think the midfield, as you said, and as I said earlier, there were all of our midfielders were sacrificed in the defensive work. I think Enrico's defensive game is where he has been needing to improve, and I think he's shown that he can improve in his defensive game. He came a long way. Well, some people said that his level had dropped from. I don't know what they're comparing it to. I don't know if they're comparing it to the U23. There's a big difference between the U23 and the senior team, and I still think he just turned 22. Uh, that's then you are number 10. It puts a lot of weight on your back. With that being said, I think that against Honduras, he played well the first half. He played 60 minutes. I still think that he offers something very different compared to what other midfielders in El Salvador can do. So I'm hopeful that once he gets more minutes in his team, and if he makes a move to another league in the summer, that he just needs more experience and more playing time. But he definitely has that style of play where he can be the one to put the pause when needed, to open up new spaces when needed. His touch is very good. We know that he can shoot with both legs. He has a lot of qualities that that can really help our team. And I was glad to see that he did a lot more in the defensive part of the game, but then it means that when you have the ball, then you are kind of running out of gas to attack, right? And I think that happened to a lot of our midfielders in
Yeah.
games like this, where you need to put a lot of work into defending. Um, Yeah, Landaverde is also coming from not playing much because he had an injury, but we
Mhm.
know of his potential and what he can do. It was not Heido's best game. He lost a lot of balls today. He he lost almost every one-on-one today. And players have good and bad games, but we are a team that have depended on him doing his magic a lot, and today was definitely not his game. And the U.S. knows him very well.
Yeah.
I think Mayer came in really, really pumped and with a lot of energy. He showed some interesting stuff. Another positive aspect is Benjivar making his debut in the official match. Um,
He looked
Obviously,
very shaky at
he's
first,
yeah,
almost to the point where you could ask, like, does he belong? But then towards the end of the game, you could see him getting more comfortable, with his passes on the right wing. The amagues or regates that he was doing started to make more sense. They weren't as forced as they were at the beginning, and you could see him get more confident as the game went on. We'll see what this grows into because I haven't seen too many of his highlights playing out in Chalate. He does seem a little unorthodox in the way that most of Salvadoran players tend to be when they haven't been exposed to international play. So we'll see if that's a plus or something negative, but it's an interesting piece that we'll see
yeah.
if they'll use him. I personally think there's different options that we can use in the midfield, but considering, he's 21, he's from the domestic league, if he's doing well in the league, he deserves a shot. Um, but yeah, I think mainly I would like to see, considering that now the 9 position seems to be a little more defined, having all 3 kid brothers possibly fitting into that position, not having to depend on some of the older players, but we need to get that midfield, in the right position. Like I almost think if Rodan doesn't get injured, maybe he gets put back into the mid as we've seen in other matches, just to hold things down a little bit.
In the center.
Yeah. Sorry. But again, overall interesting match. I liked his movements. I liked, him getting the ball. I liked the pressure that he was putting on the defense physically, which is something we really don't see. Our players is overpowering center backs from other teams with more physicality. And he definitely brought that element where, and I feel like most of the players, because you saw it from Enrico, just straight up running at people and almost knocking them over, like straight up bodying some of the US players, at least in the first half. And then just reading the reactions, like internationally, or at least from the US, the optics are very different on this national team. Because I think there's this more objective approach to how this team is performing in comparison to previous performances, like we mentioned. Even during the days of De Los Cobos when El Salvador was up 2-0, there was always that anxiety of, are they going to hold on to it? Is this really happening? How are we 2 up on them? Are they going to be able to get the 3 points? And then ultimately, whether it was an Amaño or just sloppy play, things didn't go our way. But these last 4 matches, there's this cool collectedness to this team where you can tell they've been studying their rival. There's a game plan, and it's not just left up to chance. I just want to see that organization last the 90 minutes. And I feel like in other games, El Salvador was able to do it, the 0-0 at El Cusca, the 1-1 at El Cusca to keep that order. But considering how the US plays at home and the results, I think a 1-0 is definitely um a very, very good sign of things to come. Obviously, you want history to happen and us to get a win. But considering all the factors that we've mentioned, I'll take a 1-0 in not insignificant tournament, but just a recent new one that, that's I would call it Torneo del Horno. Obviously it'd be dope if we were in the top four, but and getting more experience, more games at that level. But we're in the Gold Cup
The next Nation League is what matters. The next edition.
for the Copa America, right?
There's nothing. I mean, you want to win, so I'm not in any way saying I don't care if we don't win. But there's not a whole lot we're playing for. But the next one, that's going to determine Copa America, and it's also going to determine where you start, how you start the qualifiers to the World Cup.
So with that segue, would you be down to break down the announcement for the format for qualifying for the next couple of years?
All right. So the qualification process for the World Cup is very different than it has been recently. So there's no more hexagonal, there's no more octagonal.
Final round robin.
Right. Basically, they're gonna take the first round is gonna be the four worst teams in the area,
ranking wise,
according to the CONCACAF ranking, not the FIFA ranking. So those four teams are gonna play against each other, and the two winners are going to join the other 28 teams in the ranking of CONCACAF. So at that point, you end up with 30 national teams. Those 30 national teams are going to be split into 6 groups of 5. Each national team is going to play 4 games in their groups. The top 2 teams in each group qualify to the third round and final round. So basically, that's going to end up with 12 national teams, first and second place in each group. So those 12 national teams are going to be split into 3 groups of 4. The winners of those groups qualify to the World Cup, and the 2 best second places in the final round will play the intercontinental playoff.
So the repechaje, in other words.
Yep.
And then with all this Champions League news, basically the 2022-23 Nations League is going to close out this summer now that the final 4 have been set. This tournament was used to qualify for Gold Cup, and El Salvador, by coming in second in its group, is automatically into qualifying for this summer's Gold Cup. Now there's going to be the next tournament is going to be expanded from 12 to 16 teams. The teams that make it to the quarterfinals and win will qualify to the Copa America to be played in 2024, if I'm not mistaken. And then Nations League will also serve to qualify for the Copa Oro of 2025, but CONCACAF has not released the format or how, the details as to how to qualify for that yet. So anyway, going back to it, 2023 Nations League, the main objective was Gold Cup, and use that as a launching pad to get this next World Cup qualifying process started. And I think right now, we have a little more answers than questions than we had a month ago, or even, after the Nicaragua game.
Yeah, so to summarize it, in terms of World Cup qualifiers, as far as El Salvador concerns, we are already in the top 28 in the CONCACAF ranking. So we're basically going to go in the second round, along with the 2 winners of the first round. So there's going to be a total of 30 national teams. those 30 national teams, not including the 3 North American teams that are qualified automatically, USA, Canada, and Mexico. So those 30 national teams will be split into groups of 5. So we're going to have 6 groups of 5. The first and the second place of those groups will go to the third round. So we're going to have 12 national teams. Those 12 national teams will be split into 3 groups of 4. And the winners, the first place in those groups, will go to the World Cup directly. So that's going to be 3 teams. And then the best second places will go and play the repechaje.
Well, and there you have it in terms of, what we have to look forward to in terms of the games ahead of us. I think, if we can get the Gold Cup under this team's belt, if we could qualify to the next Copa America, I think that would come at a perfect moment in terms of fine-tuning things and getting international play under a lot of these young players' belts. I just hope we have all the pieces in place. I feel, and I want to give a shout out to listener Pugglesworth on IG, who hit us up earlier and mentioned that if at some point on the show we can do like a depth chart in terms of, where La Selecta's at depth wise per position. And I think that's a great idea. But before we do that, because we don't have enough time today. But obviously we're lacking left back. I think the midfield has to be fine-tuned depending on the rival that we're playing. If we have to be defensive like today, who can give us a chance to break out through the lines and get an attack going without, their legs crumbling from under them. And then, with adding Brian Hill, how does that look like, and who's going to be his backup in case, like today he goes down due to injury. It's a lot on the horizon, basically, is all I'm saying. I'm excited. But I think this Gold Cup's going to be make or break in terms of Hugo Perez and his tenure with, the prospect of the new federation board coming in. There's still strings that need to be tied before you can consider this proceso truly started. And then getting some players back that have been away due to injury. So we'll see.
We have Andres Rico dying here.
Yep, pretty much. All right. So I think with that, and before my voice goes away or hack up a lung, we're going to end tonight's episode. Want to appreciate y'all for checking in on Twitter, Instagram. Don't forget to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen to us. Hopefully you're able to cop your kits. Appreciate y'all for liking and chatting it up with us once we found that live link before they were officially released. Hopefully we didn't get classic football shirts in trouble. Hashtag not a sponsor yet, but we here. Anyway, I think we'll talk about the kits later on. Hopefully we'll not cop them sometime soon. But yeah, positive things on the horizon, I feel. And we're 2.5 months out of Gold Cup, right? 3 months.
It's around the corner.
No games have been announced in between then.
And the Central American games.
When are the games? Sorry.
June.
Okay.
I think they might overlap with the Gold Cup, I think.
So stuff to look forward to. In the meantime, we'll keep working on getting guests. I'll have to admit, insider info here. It's been super hard to get guests. So we'll keep reaching out to people and see who we can get on the pod, get some fresh perspectives. Either within the team, coaching staff, or on the outside. But we always love talking to people. So hopefully we'll get some chats on here from now until June. And in the meantime, get ready because it's starting. And I feel like today after today, I get that sensation of, okay, it's go time, in the sense that I didn't feel that versus Nicaragua. I didn't feel that against Peru. Now it's finally 2023. It's time to get to work. Um, we have a gap filled in terms of the 9 position, but we got to keep at working at that depth. Make sure it's sustainable in case the load's too much for Brian, or some injuries happen. But overall, happy to see the debut for him, a couple other guys, and not getting spanked by the US. It's always a horrible feeling. Anyway, with that, Ugo, you want to say anything before we head on out?
No, just looking forward to what's next. Hopefully, this is not insider information. This is just me hoping that we get some friendly matches in April, May. I mean, they're not FIFA windows, so it's gonna be tough. But I think it'll be beneficial to the national team to get some games in before we play the Gold Cup.
Yeah, or that infamous Asian camp that hasn't been announced yet, or we don't know what stage that planification's in. So we'll be waiting for that update and definitely talk about it once we hear something about it. But in the meantime, thanks again to everybody for checking in, listening in, and I hope you enjoy the match and enjoy the games coming up over the summer. We'll see you soon.